So this is lesson 9 in Algebra 2, percent word problems. Probably the hardest thing about these word problems is the silliness that they use when they're doing the problems. So let's look at example 9.1. The wood nymphs and the maids gamboled and frolicked. So gamboled is kind of merrily dancing in a meadow of flowers. So let your mind go where it wants with that. And they frolicked before the banquet began. Okay, so we don't really care what they did. We just know that we have wood nymphs and maids. If 70% of those present, so 70% of the total of those present were wood nymphs and 120 maids were present, how many wood nymphs came to the banquet? So, what do we know about any of this? We know that 70% were wood nymphs, but we know how many maids were there. So there were 120 maids. So if 70% were wood nymphs, what was the percentage of maids? There would have been 30%. So 30% of the total were maids, and that equals 120, right? So 30% and of means multiply, of the total is 120. Change that to a decimal. Divide by 0.3. That goes away. So the total number at the banquet would have been 400. That's not what they were asking. They're asking how many wood nymphs there were. But if we know the total is 400 and we know there were 120 maids, then the rest of them would have had to have been wood nymphs. Okay, so it's just using the of and knowing what you're looking for here. That's probably the key thing, is knowing what you're looking for and using some problem solving strategies in order to find out what's going on. Okay, so 9.2. The harvest was cornucopian, which means it was really good. It was 120% greater than last year. The yield was 140,800 bushels. So that's how much it was. This number is 120% higher than it was last year. So how do we do that? 120% of last year's was 140,800. Okay, so 120% times last year. All right, let's not write last year. Let's just call it last year. And that equals 140,800. Now again, you cannot do the math with a percent sign. We have to change that to a decimal. But before we change it to a decimal, let's look at something that's going on here. This is 120% above last year, which is true. 120% above last year's is 140,800, but 120 above last year or beyond last year or greater than last year. Last year's, regardless of how good the harvest was, last year's harvest was 100%. So it was 120% greater than last year's. So it really, when you add last year's to this year's, you really have 220%. So we're going to make that 2.20. We're going to change it from a percent to a decimal. We're going to multiply it by last year's and get 140,800. Divide both sides by 2.2. And we get 64,000 bushels. All right, so a key thing that everybody seems to forget is we not only are 120% greater, but greater than what? Greater than the 100%. So these two have to be combined. You always have to add that 100%. So when you're looking at the problem sets like number 2, Maybe that's the only one in here. No, letter B in the practice, production increased 145%, so you have to have 100 there. So anyway, don't forget to add 100 to those percentages so that you can do that. So really, those are the only couple problems for problem set 9 that they're doing with problem set 9. The other ones are review problems, of course, to keep you up on previous assignments so you don't forget them. But that's it for problem set 9, or lesson 9 and problem set 9.